Hi, and welcome to the Sit Down with Suzanne podcast.
Bum, 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 positively Susan, positively Susan, bum, 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 ba-da-da-dum, bum, 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 positively Suzanne.
All right, and welcome to the show. It is 2020. I just can't wrap my head around it. I remember as a child, I used to just even think about, the year 2020 and what it would look like. I don't know. I thought it would be so futuristic and the things that were going to be possible to do. And, granted, we have made so many different technological advances and medical advances, and there's so many things that we can do, but I just never fathomed 2020. It seems so impossible. It seems so far away. But then again, I was a child, so being 20 or 30 seemed old, right? I remember when we were panicking about Y2K and everybody was concerned that the world was going to end and computers were going to shut down, and that was just such a distant memory now. My poor kids, I don't even say anything to them about it because they would absolutely not understand what I was talking about. But yes, it is the year 2020 and it is a brand new start. And I personally don't believe you need to wait for a new year or a new decade to do something. You can start something at any time. But if you have started something, here is me encouraging you and wishing you the best. The last episode, I talked about having a plan. So just make sure you have those plans in place because I want to see you successful in 2020. I want you to win. So don't forget to send those things to me to let me know what you're doing and how you're winning. And for me, it's all about helping and empowering others. So I want to make sure that I continue to do that. So jumping into the question this week, this question is about how do I forgive somebody that has hurt me? Well, I will tell you, it does get easier to forgive the older I get. A lot of times somebody will do something that is shady, quite honestly, very shady, and I'm upset by it. But then in the long run, I just think about in terms of where they are in my life. And if it's an acquaintance, it's fine. You forgive and you move on. I think sometimes with loved ones that you love deeply, depending on the level of betrayal, it's harder to forgive, but it's so important to forgive because, one of my earlier episodes, I had talked about what I had learned about dying. And, a friend had reached out to me in regards to losing a family member. And, I remember what I felt like when I lost someone, I lost someone that I loved. So just the thought of being angry with them being the very last memory that I have is something that pushes me to forgive and pushes me to be the bigger person. So, I have many relationships in my life that I'm working on enhancing. I'm working on being better. But I do think, like I said, the older I get, the deeper I grow in my faith. And it gets easier for me to forgive because, like I said, I don't want it to be the last memory. And it takes too much effort to hold a grudge. It takes way too much time and way too much energy to hold a grudge. So, anyway, that's how I forgive. I just think about it in the long terms and just where does it fall under. And, I let the other person know that they hurt me. I let them know what they did. And sometimes they're ready to accept it or not. But I'm just okay with addressing it and moving on. And I'm not going to let it stop me from doing what I need to do in my life. I'm not going to let it stop me from enjoying my life. So, this week's episode, I am talking about the power of words. Now, I remember as a child, and I wrote an article about this in my monthly magazine, Positive Vibes. And, it was a chant I used to say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but word can't hurt me. And, it was something that you chanted all the time when somebody was teasing you or mocking you. And, you learn that's not true, right, as you get older. And, spiritually, there's also a scripture that speaks to, life and death is in the power of the tongue. So you learn that, you know, your words have the power to build up, your words have the power to give life, and it has the power to bring about death and destruction. So that is something that I do believe spiritually. So, that being said, and now it's so easy, like everybody just uses whatever words they want. We live in a society that is consistently negative, and people criticize and talk about kids and talk about adults and talk about just so many different things and races and religions, and some things they know nothing about, but they feel justified talking about it, freedom of speech. And the other thing is that then sometimes people get offended by things that you don't mean to offend somebody by, right? But I truly believe that words are powerful and words are something that can hurt you. And if you're not mindful of the words that you say, you can destroy trust, you can destroy a person, and you can destroy a relationship. Um, I talked about my She podcast experience. And last year when I went to Atlanta, and it wasn't a negative experience per se. This particular incident, I think overall the conference was wonderful. I met so many people, I gained so much knowledge and things that I'm still implementing today, and I'm still connected to so many of the different women through social media, and we're still figuring out ways to help each other. I reach out to them with questions that I have, and same thing. But I remember talking to a lady, and she said, she was asking me what my podcast was about. And then she was asking this other lady what hers was about. And the lady told her what hers was about. And she was like, oh, well, that's wonderful. And then, she asked me about mine. And I told her I was just so excited. I told her it was about positivity and all that. She's like, oh, it's a positive one. I said, yes. She's like, oh, and it was like right then and there, she dismissed me. And I thought about it wasn't done, I think, in a malicious way. She then, just commented, well, there's a lot of those out there. And I'm thinking to myself, yes, there's a lot of positive podcasts out there, but we need a lot of positive podcasts because there's a lot of negative ones out there. And, immediately I thought about, well, what if I had suffered from like low self-esteem, or I was feeling hesitant about sharing my podcast, or if I was hesitant about starting my podcast, and just her saying that in the dismissive tone and just, turning away, honestly would have, stopped somebody in their tracks. And I don't think she even thought about it. Like I said, I don't think it was done maliciously, but it just, and I'm talking about it because I remember it, because it was like the one spot that I was like, well, if I was made up any other way, then I certainly would have reacted differently. And I think about being a parent and the things that I say to my kids, and how important it is that the words that I say to them build them up and uplift them. And, obviously it will reprimand them, and it will teach them, and it will guide them, and it will correct them, because I do believe in raising polite kids who are respectful to adults. So I have to address instances where they're not doing the right things. But it is my job to empower them. It is my job to ensure that they know that they are loved. It is my job to ensure that they know that they're worthy, that they're beautiful, that they're intelligent, that they're capable, that they can be whatever they want to be. And it is my job as a parent to give them this information every day, to say the words every day. It's like, can you imagine as a parent? And I know it happens with some parents, they're constantly, beating down their child and telling them they're the worthless, or they're not worthy, and they're just like, the mother or the father or whatever it is, and you're no good and things like that. Think about that experience, and hopefully you're not the one that had that experience. But think about a child hearing that every day of their life. They're going to believe that. If you look at the rate of, depression and suicides and things like that among teens, you'll find a lot of it is related to words that were spoken to them, by whether it's by a parents or being bullied in school or things like that. They're not feeling like they're good enough, they're pretty enough, or, thin enough, or whatever it is. So you absolutely know that words are important. And I just want to encourage somebody, just be mindful of the words that you say to others. If the words that are coming out of your mouth is not meant to bless, uplift, or empower someone, shut it down. Don't use it. Don't say it. Just don't say it to anyone. I mean, what's the point if you want to go around and be, negative and discourage someone? Then okay. But I truly believe that most of us are good human beings. And I'd love to believe that all of us, but it's not true. And I'd love to believe that all of us are great human beings, but we're not. So, but the good thing is that we all have opportunities to grow. So don't go around putting people down because of anything. And a lot of times there's nothing they can help. And you go around, putting folks down. Lift up each other. There was an old saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I think that still holds true today. We have to get into the habit of holding back things that are harmful, holding back words that are meant to hurt people. And, think about it. Somebody said something to me the other day and they're like, no offense. And, it's funny that people sometimes right before they insult you, they'll say no offense. Yes, I am still offended, not because you said no offense or I don't mean to insult you, but then I'm going to turn around and insult you. It is still an insult, no matter if you say I don't mean to insult you. So if you're unsure of it, don't say it, or talk to the person privately, one away, and ask them something versus saying out in a public forum where you have the opportunity to embarrass them, to hurt them. Because a lot of times when there's an audience, it escalates the situation and it makes it worse than it should be or it can be. You know, I work in retail and we've always been taught that, you praise in public and you reprimand in private. And I think that is something you should do in life. Praise in public and reprimand in private. If you have something to say to somebody that's, saying, hey, kudos, good job, or things like that, you can do that publicly. But if it's something that you're going to point out to them, whether it's something they did wrong or a flaw or something like that that you feel the need to address, do that thing privately. So just, I've thrown out a lot of quotes or cliches or whatever it is, but these are things that I've used, in my life, things that I learned growing up. The first one I had mentioned is sticks and stones can break my bone, that words cannot hurt me. Yeah, that's not true. Words can absolutely hurt you. And then the other thing was, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Or using the phrase, no offense, or I'm not trying to insult you in front of a sentence doesn't make it less offensive. And it doesn't make it, not an insult. And I do want to apologize. Like my throat, I have been fighting something for the longest time and it seems to come and goes, but I am trusting God and I am not claiming it. I believe that I am healed, and I've said it before, and I believe that I am healed, but I do live in a colder climate, right? Anyway, so let's focus on using our words to empower. Let's focus on using our words to uplift. Let's focus on using our words to help others. And a lot of times people will say things and not realize how truly hurtful or harmful it is. And personally, I've experienced moments where people have said things to me and, they'll say, like I mentioned before, they'll say no offense or something like that and thinking it's not harmful. And I will admit, I do have a very healthy self-esteem. But you know what? It wasn't like I was born with it, although some people say I was. But I did go through moments where, people were very unkind, and then I had to build my strength, my inner core, so that things bounce off me so it doesn't affect me. But like with my kids, I know how important it is to build their self-esteem because they won't be where I am right now. So I make sure, like, as mad as they make me, and yeah, believe me, you can be mad as your kids. I know some parents says, you can't be mad at your kids. Listen to me. Kids will drive you nuts sometimes. You love them. God's greatest gift to you, but they will drive you nuts. My daughter, my goodness, if I tell her one more time to clean her room and she cleans it, and I go in and inspect it, and I just don't understand how in 5 minutes it gets messy again. But at the end of the day, you think about the grand scheme of things, what's a messy room? So love them, love them, love them. But anyway, you think about even in that moment when you're mad at your child or upset at your child or whatever you want to call it, you can't use words that's going to break them down. That's not the point. You're not supposed to break it apart and put it back together. That's not how it goes. So I'm still mindful of every word that I say to them. I think about my relationship with my husband and why it's important that if we get, upset at each other, I always try to make sure that I don't say anything that I can't take back in the heat of the moment. And my husband doesn't argue. Believe me, it's very difficult to have an argument with him because he doesn't. I'm like 10 decibels high and he's just like down there, and I'm like, okay, dude, like, so if I'm gonna yell, I'm just gonna be yelling by myself, so it makes no point. He takes all the fun out of fighting, FYI. But anyway, and I wouldn't change it for the world because I don't think the marriage would survive with two people at 10 all the time, right? Anyway, but no, and even like I said, in moments when my husband drives me crazy, I'm still mindful of the things that I say to him, and that's what I'm going to encourage you. If you're in a relationship with someone, and I advised somebody about this the other day, if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're in a fight, as it does happen, people tend to get on each other's nerves. Still be careful of the things you say. You don't want to say something that is going to destroy that person, that they feel less than, that they feel unworthy. Because then, how do you then come back? Because then, if you're in a fight and you throw the worst things you can at them, like just utterly decimate them and destroy them, and then you're like, I'm done with the fight, I want to move on. Where do you go from there? Like, how do you just say, oh, sorry about that and move on? Yes, you're supposed to, but why do it in the first place? I understand that when you're fighting, you're mad and things like that, but there are certain things that should not come out of your mouth when you're fighting. When you're, mad at your kids, there's certain things that don't come out of your mouth. When you're mad at your spouse, there's certain things that don't come out of your mouth. Same thing with your siblings and your friends and your things like that. There's certain things that do not come out of your mouth and should not come out of your mouth. If you love somebody, there is certain things that do not come out of your mouth, because at the end of the day, when all is said and done, is it something that you're going to regret saying? And mind you, if it's something, say for instance, you want to talk to somebody about, let's say for instance, you're mad at somebody and you yell, you're an alcoholic, or you have an anger problem. Okay, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a thing where, they have a disease or they have an issue. So yeah, you could have yelled that out in the heat of the moment, and then, you can discuss this and talk about it. But, you should certainly talk to them about it, because sometimes they say the truth comes out when you're angry. But if it is something hurtful, if it's something that talks about their body type or their faith or their culture or anything like that, move on from it. Don't say it. I promise you, you're going to regret it. And once you belittle that person and say so many things, it's hard sometimes to get back to where you were. And in the back of their mind, they're always going to be wondering, you know, um, you know, if that's what you think of them. You know, I've mentioned a few times on this show that, people will say to me that, I act white, I talk white, and it honestly, it doesn't bother me anymore. And I know that when they say it, and my kids over here, they'll look at me and, like I said, I no longer even validate them by explaining anything to them. I don't think I owe them any explanation on it. But I just think that things like that are unnecessary. People pointing something like that out, or somebody pointing out, if somebody is tall, oh, they're too tall, or, they're too short. Okay, it's a fact of life. They can't help it. They can't change it. Things like that. Like, why should you always point out the bad things? Why can't we point out the good things? So this is what I want to encourage you this week. If you find yourself about to point out something negative about someone, something that doesn't impact you, if it says something that, you have a coworker or a peer and they're doing something that interrupts your work or distracts your work, you can address it privately and talk about it. But if it's something that you don't like the way they do their hair, it doesn't impact you, it doesn't affect you, it doesn't interfere with the way you do your work, leave it alone. You don't have to point it out. I know there's a lot of shows right now focused on who wore it best and, describing somebody's body type and fashion choices and things like that. And, it seems like fun and games and it's funny, but it's not, because those are human beings. And okay, yeah, they're celebrities, but then let's put it to other people, then take it to the level where they discuss it, use it against somebody that they know. I was reading on Twitter the other day, two reporters thought they had the right to talk about, Blue Ivy, who happens to be Jay-Z and Beyonce's daughter. This child, 7 years old, this is a baby. How do two grown adults feel that it's okay to talk about a child like that? I don't care if it's a celebrity's child. You should not be talking about a child like that. These are adults who should know better. These are adults that should be ashamed of themselves, and there should be serious consequences for them attacking a child or talking about a child like that. It shouldn't matter what the child's race or religion or anything or who their parents are. As an adult, talking about a child is off limits, and you should know better. They should know better, and we should never ever discuss. And I'm very mindful of that too in real life. You'll hear adults will say things about kids, and I'm always like, no, I don't talk about other people's kids. I don't wash my mouth on other people's kids, because I will tell you that I will defend my kid if somebody is talking about my kid. And I'll say, hey, that's just not okay. I have a cousin that passed away. His name was Devin, and I loved him dearly. One of my favorite cousins, and I miss him. I miss him a lot. And I remember so many, many years ago, um, we were at his house, and he had a little sister that he loved, just adored her. And I don't remember who it was or what it was. And somebody had said, the little girl, I think she had spilled something, or I'm not sure what she did. But I remember they had said to him, like, she spilled something or whatever. And he was like, yeah, she doesn't listen or something like that. But then I remember him saying, like, just correcting himself immediately and say, no, I made a pledge. I would never talk about her as if she's not here when she's here. I will never talk about her. And I was so impressed by that, because he was young, and it blew my mind. And I didn't have kids at the time. It just blew my mind, that he just said that. He was like, yeah, and it blew my mind. And that's what I want to encourage you. Like, when you have your kids, a lot of times parents will talk about their kids, like, not not necessarily in a bad way, but they'll say things like, to a family member or whatever, yeah, like this kid doesn't listen or things like that. I'm going to encourage you, don't do that. So that memory from my cousin Devin always lived on in me. And I was so impressed with it. And it's one of the things that I've kept with me as a parent, that this is my child. I'm not going to talk about my child in front of them or behind them. I'm going to use words to empower and uplift them. And you know what, same thing with somebody else's child. As a parent, there are no perfect kid, right? Every kid has their moment, and some are more well behaved than some. So if you're a parent and you're in a store and you see a child having a temper tantrum, oh, I'm like, all right. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna say anything, but I know I turn and look at my kid. I'm like, that better not be you. And there's different levels of parents and how the parent deals with it and things like that. But never say your kid won't do that. What I say is my kid only needs to do it once. And then, I'll handle it and they won't have to do it again, or they won't do it again. But like, come on. Make kids off limit. I'm going to encourage you. Don't talk about others, but make kids off limits. Don't talk about kids. Any kids, your kids, any kids, lift them up. My goal this year, and it's is to touch more people. So it's to grow the podcast and to be on more outlets, more medium, to spread my message of positivity on so many different platforms, in so many different areas, in different avenues, in different places, to different people. There is so much negativity out there, and I'm going to combat that one day at a time. And every day I hope to impart an inspirational message that will empower and it will motivate. And I hope that it doesn't matter if there's one person listen to the podcast or a million people listen to the podcast. You hear that? God, a million people. I want you to take from this episode, it's not okay to talk about others. It's not okay to bully others. It's not okay to put down others. Words have power. Words give life. Word brings about death and destruction. Words destroy relationship. Words can create friendship, and words can make meaningful relationships. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on building up with our words. When you motivate someone with your words, when you encourage someone with your words, they will go and do so much for you. If you have an employee and they're feeling defeated, and you go in there and you give them a motivating talk and you touch on things that they did well, you certainly could talk about their opportunities and, address it. Don't overlook it, because you still want to lead. And then, let's focus on how we're going to turn this around. I guarantee you that employee will move mountains to turn around what you want turn around, versus if you go in there and you talk about how poor they are, or how, they're not doing well, or, just how bad a performer they are. I guarantee you they will remain unmotivated and they won't want to turn it around. So encourage, uplift, empower. And, before I sign off, one lessons, and I've had some great leaders throughout my life, and I didn't realize it at the time. And I remember I don't remember if it was, and I just said I remembered, but I think it was a regional manager that I had when I was with this company. I was a district manager for this company. And she had said, whenever you're letting go of somebody, you always have to think of, did I give this person everything? And that's a motto that I followed each time I'm with somebody and I have to terminate somebody. I think, did I give them all the skills? Did I train them? Did I teach them? Did I, not skills, all the tools to develop their skills so that they could be the best they could be. So every time you're letting go of somebody, you don't say, well, they're awful and they're not good. You have to put that on you. You have to take that accountability on you and say, did I equip them? Did I set them up for success? And if you could answer that question to yourself honestly, then you've done your part. So never let go of somebody without finding out if you did everything you could to ensure that person was the best employee. So let's focus on empowering. Let's focus on encouraging. Let's use our words to build, to lift. And I guarantee you it will be worth it. If you start to use words differently in your life and in your relationships, you'll see a monumental change in the way your relationships are. I'm mindful of the words I use in my relationship with God. I'm mindful of the words that I use in the relationship with my husband, with my kids, with my best friend, with my family, and the changes that I see in my relationship, I know it's because of the words. And even when I'm mad, I make sure that the words that I use are not words that's meant to destroy. Because how can you destroy something and then turn around and then want to say, okay, this is something that I love? Because if you love something, you don't destroy it. So just be mindful of it. And even if you have to bite your tongue and hold it, let's just use empowering words, encouraging words. So that is it for me. I'm hoping the next episode that my voice will be 100%. I can't hear myself right now because I feel like I'm in my head and I think I sound a little nasally. I think I sound like Fran Drescher from The Nanny, but hey, I enjoyed that show. I watched every episode when it was on. But anyway, that is it for me. And I'm going to say ta-ta, toodles, and bye-bye. And until next time, let's use our word to build and to create.